This video is all about the top camera sales in Japan for the month of September. Not the first 2 weeks, not the last 2 weeks, but the entire month. And I'm going to look at the top 5 camera retailers. Does Canon still dominate the top 5 positions at 5 major retailers? And what about Sony? Are they still dominating that #1 position with the Sony a7 IV? Details coming up, but first, I encourage you to subscribe and choose all notifications so you're kept informed on the latest camera gear, news, and rumors. Last week, I published this video here where I said Canon absolutely dominates the top 10 camera sales for Yodobashi in Japan for the first 2 weeks of September. I was using sales data. I'm not reading anything else into this. So looking at the top 10, 6 of the top 10 SKUs were Canon cameras. The R5, the R3, the R6, the R10, and the R7 in both kit and body forms. I was not prepared for the backlash. A lot of people were coming at me saying, "Are you crazy? Are you nuts? The way Canon's come down like a bag of wet hammers on third-party lens makers, wait and see. Once this information is taken into account, you're going to see Canon's numbers drop." I even had people criticizing the jacket I was wearing or the way my hair looked. This week, I'm going to change things up a little bit. Instead of looking at the first 2 weeks of September, because we're now in the future, I can look at the entire month of September. And I'm not just going to look at Yodobashi. I'm going to look at the top 5 camera retailers in Japan. And because we have a lot more camera data to sift through, I'm just going to focus on the top 5 positions. And I know, I can hear it already. Why aren't you going to cover off the top 10? We're not going to hear from Nikon, Pentax, Fuji. We are. But there's an awful lot of data. And what I want to show you is the cameras that are capturing the imagination of retailers. Well, not retailers, of people buying cameras at retailers. And it's Japan. And while Japan is a market, it's not the entire world. This is a huge sample size. This is a much bigger sample size than last week. It's for a longer period of time, double the period of time actually. And it's possible to draw conclusions from how well that market, it's a huge enough sample size as to what we could expect to see in terms of sales in the rest of the world. Looking at Yodobashi camera, we can see that Sony still dominates the top spot with the Sony a7 IV. When the Sony FX30 comes online, I wonder if it's going to take over that position or at least drop the Sony a7 IV down a little bit more, because for shooting video, the Sony FX30 at $1798 is an incredible bargain, giving it all the same capabilities of the a7S III, the FX3, but with an APS-C sensor. And a lot of people who have been buying the a7 IV for video purposes are going to latch onto that FX30. In second place, we have the Canon EOS R5, a camera that's been selling very, very, very well since it came out in July of 2020. In third spot, we have the Canon EOS R10 kit with the RFS 18-150 image stabilized STM. So for those of you that thought the news about Canon coming down on third-party lens makers hadn't quite hit the market yet, well, more time has passed, so more people are aware of this. And yet, instead of hurting sales of the Canon EOS R10 or even the R5, the R10 has moved up several place points, at least 3 points up to third spot. And this is where the Canon EOS R3 was before, so it certainly displaced the R3 from the top 5, well, at least the top 3. In fourth place, we have another Sony, and that's the FX3 cinema camera. No surprises that this camera is in the top 4. Like I said, as soon as the FX30 comes online, I have no doubt that this is going to dominate the top 5. It's going to move up higher than 4th position to probably 2nd or even 1st. The FX3, the a7S III, and the FX30 all have the same capabilities. They're just packaged in a slightly different way. The a7S III has a smaller body, the FX3 has a larger body and more cinema-like capabilities, but still not a true cinema camera, more of a video-centric camera. And then, of course, we have the FX3, which has the exact same identical video frame rates and resolutions, but has an APS-C sensor and comes at just under half the price of the Sony a7S III and the FX3. In 5th place, we have the Canon EOS R3. So it's dropped down from 3rd place to 5th place, but we've seen the Canon EOS R10 move upwards, as well as the Sony FX3. So when it comes to Yodobashi, we can see that Canon is still dominating the top 3. But Sony's in a very healthy position with the #1 spot in the Sony a7 IV. But Canon's doing very well with the R5 in 2nd place, which is a very expensive camera. The R3, which is in 5th place, another expensive camera with good healthy margins. But then we see a very affordable, one of the most affordable, actually the most affordable Canon R system camera out there, the Canon EOS R10 kit version with the 18-150 image stabilized STM. Next up is Bic Canera. the #1 spot also goes to the A7 IV. And second place, another Sony, and that's the ever popular ZV-E10, a very powerful vlogging camera with that power lens zoom kit. And #3, we see our first Canon, and again, no surprises, it's the same camera that was in Yodobashi at #3, and that's the Canon EOS R10 with the RF 18-150 image stabilized STM. In fourth place, we have the A6400 double lens zoom kit, which we also saw in the Yodobashi top 10 last week at about position 6. And in fifth place, we have an older camera from Canon, and that's the Canon EOS RP with a 24-105 image stabilized STM kit. So with Bic Camera, it's pretty clear that Sony's dominating the top 5 with 3 positions, the #1, #2, and #4. And again, we see that A7 IV in the top position. But Canon isn't doing too badly here. Again, that Canon EOS R10 with the 18-150 in the #3 spot. And of course, the Canon EOS RP, which has been out since 2019 with the kit 24-105. That's not the F4 version like I've got right here, this one here. I love the F4. It's weather sealed. I think it's a much better lens. But you can't argue with the Canon EOS RP with the 24-105 in that #5 position. It's still selling very, very well, despite, well, at least for video, being quite outdated and outclassed by the competition. Next up, we have Camera Kitamura. In the #1 spot, we see the Sony 8. Actually, we don't. In this case, we see the Canon EOS R7, a camera that hasn't shown up at Bic Camera or even Yodobashi in the top 5. But following closely in second place, we do see the Sony A7 IV. So once again, it's pretty safe to say that the Sony A7 IV is probably the world's top-selling camera at this point. We see in the first 3 camera retailers in Japan, we see that the Sony A7 IV, if it's not in first place, is in second place. And I'm curious to see how that's going to play out at Map Camera and Fujiya Camera. In third place, once again, we see the Canon EOS R10 with the same kit package, the 18-150 image stabilized STM. And again, looking back at Bic Camera and Yodobashi, we can see that camera is still stubbornly placed in third spot. At $979 with 6K oversample 4K, the Canon EOS R10 offers a lot of modern features without overly cropping like the previous cameras like the Canon 90D, like the Rebel T8i, or even the SL2 and the SL3. In fourth place, we don't see a Canon or a Sony, but the Fujifilm XS10 double lens zoom kit. And in fifth position, we see a Nikon, the Nikon Z9. So at Camera Kitamura, it's pretty safe to say that Canon dominates with the R10 and the R3. Nabbing that #1 spot for the first time of the 3 companies that we've looked at so far, Canon's doing quite well here, but it's really nice to see that we're seeing some other cameras in the top 10. We've got a Fuji and we've got a Nikon as well. Now turning over to Map Camera, the #1 spot is once again held by, no surprises here, the Sony A7 IV. And in second place, we have the Nikon Z30. And guess what we have in third place? And if you guessed the Canon EOS R10, you'd be correct, but it's not the kit version with the 18-150, it's just the body alone. And in fourth place, we have the Canon EOS R7, followed by the Fujifilm X-H2S in fifth place. So once again, with Map Camera, Canon's dominating with 2 cameras in the top 5. And it's really not a surprise here. The R7 and the R10 are relatively new cameras, so when they're in high demand, and we see this all the time with new cameras when they come out, they tend to dominate sales because they're new. People have been waiting for them. They've been saving up for them. So it's not really surprising here. It doesn't mean that Sony's doing badly, Nikon or Fuji. And what we're seeing here at Map Camera is that while Canon's dominating, they're only holding on to 2 positions. Sony's got the #1 spot. We see a Nikon with a Z30, and we also see a Fujifilm X-H2S, another recently announced camera. Now with our last camera retailer in Japan, Fujiya Camera, in the #1 spot, guess which camera we see? Is it the Sony A7 IV? No, it's the Canon EOS R7. It's managed to climb up the list to first place, dethroning Sony, pushing it down to the #2 spot with the Sony A7 IV. And in the #3 spot, we see the Nikon Z9. And this is where Canon absolutely dominates the top 5 at Fujiya Camera. We see the Canon EOS R3 in fourth place, followed by the Canon EOS R5 in fifth place. So it's pretty safe to say that Canon is dominating the top 5 at all the major camera retailers in Japan. Look closely at those numbers. Are there really any surprises? The Canon EOS R5 has been, well, it's been really hard to get for the first year and a half of its release, and even now it's still hard to get in some locations. The Canon EOS R5 has got to be Canon's most top-selling camera in the last 5 years. And the Canon EOS R10 with the 18-150 or the R7 in kit or body form, both of these two cameras are in high demand at every retailer, regardless of its location. We can see the Canon EOS R10 usually in the #1 spot with the 18-150. We see the R7 showing up. So both of those cameras are new. It's no surprise that we would see these cameras starting to dominate. And we also see the Fujifilm recent release, the X-H2S. We see the Nikon Z9 and the Nikon Z30. So we do see Fuji and Nikon cameras in the top 5 as well. So when we take a look at a larger sample size from different retailers that might be getting different inventory, that might be aiming to different customer bases, we can see that the top 5 is not just Canon dominating like it was last week at Yodobashi. And that was pretty astonishing. When we saw Yodobashi, the top 10 camera SKUs, 6 of them were Canon. I've never seen that before. But again, 3 of those positions were those new cameras, the Canon EOS R10, the Canon EOS R7, and of course the R5, which is doing very well. And as a surprise to me, the Canon EOS R3 continues to do well. So while Canon does dominate in the sheer numbers of camera units that they're shipping, Sony is dominating that #1 spot. In a few cases, in 2 cases particularly, where Sony didn't have the #1 spot, it fell to #2. So that Sony a7 IV is a very, very popular camera, liked by many, many people. And those that have cited this whole kerfuffle over the IP decision made by Canon to come down hard like a bag of wet hammers on third-party lens makers, we can see that some of those people are moving to the Sony a7 IV. But I think we're going to see a shift here. I think we're going to see the Sony a7 IV move away from that move away from that #1 spot as the Sony FX30 comes online. The Sony FX30 is a truly amazing camera. When I put out my review video covering that, I was truly amazed. It had all the same video resolutions and frame rates, codecs, capabilities as the Sony a7S III, as the FX3. The exact same capabilities. The dynamic range was almost there. 14 plus stops versus 15 plus stops for the FX3. But for half the price, less than half the price for the FX3, $1,798. We're going to see this camera in the top 5. We saw the FX3 in the top 5 in one camera retailer, but I think what we're going to start to see is once that FX30 starts shipping, which is looking like to be the end of October, around October the 28th, well, that's when we're going to start to see things change. We're going to see the FX30, I believe, dominate. I don't know if it's going to go up to the #1 position, but I think it's definitely going to be in the top 5 because you're taking those capabilities of the a7S III, which when it came out was a very powerful camera. Sure, it didn't do 6K or 8K or 6K oversample 4K, but its 4K was rather detailed, only being beat at that time by the Canon EOS R5. With the FX30 providing 6K oversample 4K, it's likely to be a little bit sharper, more detailed than the Sony a7S III, than the FX3. And I can clearly see at half the price, with basically, other than being a difference between framing between what is considered a Super 35 and a full frame, it's really hard for me to justify spending an extra $2,000 to get a full frame camera that does the exact same thing when I can have all that goodness baked into the FX30 for $1,798. That looks like a really good deal. So I think that's what we're going to see. So I hope the comments in this week are a little bit different. I want to clarify one thing when it comes to Canon's decision to enforce their patent on by getting all third-party makers to stop producing lenses without Canon's permission. I was disappointed by that because there's still a lack of RF lenses, of RFS lenses on the market. And yes, we can use this. Where is it here? I've got it here somewhere. It's hidden. I don't even know where I've put it. I've hidden it. Where is it? It's probably on one of my lenses. I think it's right here. Hold on. Yep, it's right on here. It's on my 18-135. So I do use this thing. This one has a control ring, so it's $199, but you can get them for $99. And yes, you can find third parties cheaper, but when it comes to camera gear, I want a single neck to choke. And what this will allow us to do, and what it allows me to do, is to take all EF and EFS glass and bring it over to an R system camera, whether it be an APS-C or full frame. And that includes Sigma, Tamron, anybody. And I know it's another piece. And I know it stymies competition. And while Canon is well within their right to do this, it does disappoint me much the same way that red stranglehold on compressed raw inside a camera, internally compressed raw inside a camera, has been granted as a patent. That stymies competition as well. I really do wish Nikon success in their arguments against red over this patent. And they're able to somehow look at the data from the patent, which is what they're arguing. What they're arguing is when this patent was granted, red didn't provide all the information to the patent office, and they had been marketing, they had been selling the camera a year to 2 years prior to being granted the patent, which would nullify the patent. So I wish Nikon all the best. Some of these patents, I understand the need for them because they help increase innovation. You're not going to spend a lot of money on innovating something if somebody's just going to come around and copy what you have. And I appreciate that. But 20 years, 60 years, 70 years for some of these patents, I don't agree with that. I think maybe 15 years or 12 years is a good amount of time. And that Canon's come down hard on third-party retailers is frustrating to me. But based on a poll I did not too long ago, 50% of you out there that own Canon gear aren't looking at moving anytime soon. I mean, after all, you've already got bodies and camera gear like I do. To punish Canon? Am I really punishing Canon by switching to Sony? No, I'm punishing myself because I know I won't get the full value of my lenses, and then I have to buy Sony at top dollar after prices have gone up and I bought my Canon gear at cheaper prices. So I don't really think that while a lot of people are upset over this, and I grant it, I understand you, I understand your frustration and anger, I don't think we're really seeing that in sales numbers. We've had the entire month of September, and yes, I put out videos on August the 28th, 29th, and then 2 more or 3 more after that in the first week of September. I'm not the only one to cover it. It didn't take weeks. Yes, some YouTubers didn't start covering this for weeks later, but just because they were late to it didn't mean the story didn't get out there. The R10, the R7 are popular cameras. You've got to understand too that Canon still has about 50% worldwide market share. And that's a lot of people with old glass like I've got here that are looking at, yeah, am I upset over Canon enough to sell everything and move over to Sony? Or maybe I just go ahead and buy the R7 and the R10 and I can use my old glass. I can adapt it. And I think that's what a lot of people are doing. When we see the prices of food going up oh so high as they are today, when we see inflation where it's at, that's affecting everything, fuel prices, housing prices, mortgage rates. There's an awful lot out there that we're having to deal with. So if we can save a few $100s by just upgrading within the brand we're at, sure, we might be disappointed and we might even be angry. But by switching, are we shooting Canon in the foot or are we shooting ourselves in the foot? I've published several videos recently and I was really surprised at how well they did, like covering the Canon EOS R100 yesterday. I really didn't expect more than maybe 1,000 or 2 videos, but within the first 24 hours, about 4,000 views. For a camera that many of us have said, with smartphones like the iPhone 14, does this camera really make sense? Well, based on my early leading indicator of how many people were interested in this video, there's a lot of interest. But will that interest translate into sales? Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. And if you want to stay up to date on the latest camera news and rumors or sales figures or anything like that, please go ahead and click subscribe. It really does help my channel. The more subscribers I get, the more third-party companies are interested in sending me their lenses, for example, like this Viltrox, to do reviews. So please go ahead and subscribe. And if you want to stay up to date on the latest camera news and rumors, then choose all notifications. So that way, as soon as I publish a new video, like, well, this one here, you'll get notified by YouTube. So that way you can stay up to date on the latest camera news and rumors. But that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you again soon.